What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to my channel. This is the philosophy of game mastering, and I've got some incredible news for you today. So stick around. So, what's got me so riled up this morning? Well, I'll tell you what. This wasn't the video I had planned today. I'll tell you why. Gary Gygax came to me in a dream last night, and he told me to pull out this book and read pages 112 to 113. Why? Because there's something in here that you also have to know about. What do these two books have in common, and what does it have to do with the future of Dungeons and Dragons for 2025, 2026, and 2027? Well, I'll tell you in just a few minutes. Now, I want to let you know something. I don't know anyone at Wizards of the Coast or at Hasbro. This is not insider knowledge. This is all me looking at data and speculating on the future of Dungeons and Dragons. And I wanted to share it with you. And in fact, the information that I have that's contained in these two books, yes, these two books, which are like almost 50 years apart, have a lot of information on Hasbro's plan or Wizards of the Coast's plan for next year, 2026, and 2027. You've heard it here first, so stay tuned. Now, I'm also hopped up because I've got a lot of caffeine in me, which is fine because this is probably going to be one of my best videos, right? Yes? Please like and subscribe, and let's do this. All right, now that I have way too much caffeine in me, let's get started. If you're new to my channel, thank you for being here. I would love it for you to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and hit the like button, the one that goes like this. All right, now this channel is fairly new, but I plan a long road for this channel, a long one. This channel is going to be the ultimate campaign setting, okay? And I want you to be with me from first level all the way to epic 20th level. Got it? Like and subscribe, and let's do this. Now, what does this book that was published back in like 1979, this book was published in 1979, written by Gary Gygax himself. This book came out in 2024. What does this book and this book have in common? I'll tell you that what they have in common is basically a secret that no one knows about, except me, and I'm going to tell you, so you're also going to know about it. Ready? On pages 112 of this book. And this is the book that Gary told me in my dream that I should read to you. Got it? There's a section in here I want to read to you. While it might seem highly unlikely to those who have not been involved in fantasy adventure gaming for an extended period of time, after the flush of excitement wears off, okay, that's key, excitement wearing off on fantasy games, perhaps a few months or a year, depending on the intensity of play, some participants will become bored and move to other gaming forms. Okay, that is something that Gary knew back in 1979. And what he's tapping into is the idea of newness, right? As human beings, we want things to be new and exciting all the time. And back in 1979, the most exciting thing other than playing Dungeons and Dragons was probably going to the movies and watching television. Well, it's 2024, and this book uses a keyword that Gary uses in this book. Now, I don't know who used the keyword here. It might have been Chris Perkins. I'm looking at you, Chris. Or it could have been the ghost of Gary Gygax, who somehow works at Wizards of the Coast, and they told him to write this book. I don't know. But I'm going to find out. So I'm going to continue reading this, because this is really important stuff. So on page 112 and 113, Gary Gygax is doing something that he has always been great at, and that is marketing and crossover. Now write those words down. Write down marketing and crossover, because there's one more word that I'm going to read where you're going to go, oh, I see what you're talking about, Joe. That makes a lot of sense. As has been mentioned already, the game must be neither too difficult to survive nor so easy as to offer little excitement or challenge. There must always be something desirable to gain, something important to lose, and the chance of having either happen. So as Gary talks about how players can get bored of just playing a fantasy role-playing game, he basically offers a way to counteract that, or to create new methods of newness, so to speak, in a campaign. So I'm going to continue reading here. Okay, occasionally pure fun, and that's in quotes, pure fun scenarios can be conducted also. That is, moments of silliness and humor help to contrast with the grinding seriousness of a titanic struggle and relieve participants at the same time. After all, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is first and foremost a game, a pastime for fun and enjoyment. At times, the fun aspect must be stressed. Thus, in my Greyhawk campaign, I included an Alice in Wonderland level. And while it is a deadly place, those who have adventured through it have uniformly proclaimed it as great fun because it is the antithesis of the campaign as a whole. So Gary literally introduced an Alice in Wonderland part of his campaign to relieve the stress of actually playing a long-term campaign. And this is sort of where Quests from the Infinite Staircase comes in. So it goes on page 112 of the DMG. Similarly, there are places where adventurers can journey to a land of pure Greek mythology, into the future where the island of King Kong awaits their pleasure, or through the multiverse. Yes, Gary uses the word multiverse, or through the multiverse to different planets, including Jack Vance's Planet of Adventure. So if you've read anything from Quests from the Infinite Staircase, you'll know that at the beginning of this book, the word multiverse is mentioned multiple times. And it's important because what Wizards is doing, in my opinion, and I will show you some of the second quarter results that they put out for their shareholders on their website. Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast, and Hasbro is a publicly traded company. They have every intention of becoming a much more profitable company than they currently are. And the reason they're doing that is so they can give money back to their shareholders in dividends, but also make the stock much more attractive to people who want to purchase it. That is their ultimate goal. And Dungeons and Dragons is going to be a huge part of that over the next 3 years. Oh, you're still here. Oh, awesome. So the other thing I want to mention that correlates the original first edition DMG that I was just reading from and this new book from Wizards of the Coast, Quest from the Infinite Staircase. On page 7, I want to read the first couple of paragraphs. The Infinite Staircase ushers travelers to the destinations of their dreams. The impossible staircase winds in a surreal demiplane, ascending to every world, every plane of existence, and the adventure locations found among them. Though stories abound along its many steps, the staircase is the journey, not the destination, an extraordinary means of traversing the multiverse. Now there's that word again, the multiverse.
Wanda, what do you know about the multiverse?
Viz had his theories. He believed it was dangerous.
Gary mentions it back in 1979, and Chris Perkins and his team are mentioning it again in Quests from the Infinite Staircase. Why? Well, there's one reason, and that is newness. Yes, that is a real word. When you have a company the size of Wizards of the Coast, they're competing with a lot of different companies. I mean, just look at DC-20. DC-20, run by the D&D coach, made over $2 million on Kickstarter. Over $2 million. You also have to remember what happened after D&D 3.5 came out, right? 3.0 and 3.5 created the D20 craze. And then Pathfinder, owned by Paizo, just took off. And sales of Pathfinder far exceeded sales of D&D 4th edition because D&D 4th edition was a travesty to the original players of the game. There are people who like it, who started with 4th edition. I tried it once or twice and I didn't like it, probably because I'm an older school player. Now, 3.5 was great. I liked 3.5. They made some changes to 3.0, which was a good idea. 4.0 was absolutely horrible to me. Um, and 5th edition, again, much better, right? Which has more roots to what 3.5 was. And but Pathfinder did a lot of damage to Wizards of the Coast. They really did. And I think Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast have learned from that mistake because it was a huge mistake. They were trying to turn an analog game, a tabletop game, into a video game. But people play video games for different reasons. Video games can be social, but tabletop role-playing games are the epitome of imagination and sociability. So I'm going to continue reading this next part. This chapter expands on what's written about the Infinite Staircase in the Dungeon Master's Guide and provides tools for using it to convey creatures for one fantastical location to the next. So interestingly, I don't know if this is a coincidence, I could be reading into this, but by mentioning the Dungeon Master's Guide, of course, the team at Wizards of the Coast is not mentioning the original 1979 Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide that I referenced, but I think it's a little ironic. Now, this is the other point I want to make about Gary Gygax and his incredible genius and what he was good at. So you'll have to understand that when in 1982, when the module S3 Expedition to the Barrier Peaks came out, that was specifically done as a D&D module to tie in to Gamma World. And many people don't know this, but that's exactly what Gary was doing. He was putting lasers and powered armor in there to take the players and the Dungeon Master for a little while outside of fantasy. It was still deep fantasy because technically the Barrier Peaks are a part of Greyhawk, which was Gary Gygax's campaign setting. And actually, Chris Perkins, who's my age, actually had the same exact reaction that I did when I saw the cover of that module.
I remember where I was when I opened this the first time as a kid.
Module S3, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks.
Yes.
Also by Gary Gygax. I think there's a certain love it or hate it. It depends on how strongly you cling to D&D as traditional medieval fantasy, because this is not that. No.
Looking at that Earl Otis painting of a character in a helmet shooting some weird creature, some jellyfish creature, shocked me. I was like, this isn't D&D.
No.
And when I first saw, as a kid, module S3 on the store shelf, and I saw this image of, there's like this Errol Otis illustration of this weird flower-like plant monster being shot by a character with a laser pistol. My first reaction was, oh, there's no laser guns in D&D.
That is exactly how
And then I was super confused because I saw it by Gary Gygax. I'm like, oh, well, if Gary says it's okay.
And Chris Perkins said something very similar in a video about Quest from the Infinite Staircase. That's not a coincidence. Gary did that on purpose because what Gary was doing is something called a pattern interrupt. Now, if you don't know what a pattern interrupt is, it's used by salespeople to make you aware of something. And as an example, this is a pattern interrupt. Okay, you see what I did there? I could create this video of me just talking in a monotone voice like this. And after a few minutes, you're going to get bored and you're going to click away until I do something like that. And you're going to be excited again. And it's going to pull you back in. That's what Wizards of the Coast is doing with the future of D&D. This is how it's going to be. This is how it has to be for them to gain attention. This is how they're going to pull ahead of all the independent publishers who are also doing a really good job. Now, I, for one, love the independent publishers. I also love D&D and Wizards of the Coast. I think they did a good thing because they got rid of some of the people who were toxic to the company. They realized that, they listened to the fans, and they made a change. Thumbs up to you, Wizards of the Coast. Now, I want to go back to talk about Gary Gygax and the genius that he was. So, the reason for page 112 and 113 in a book about Dungeons and Dragons has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. He's actually talking about crossovers to other TSR products. Number one, he mentions Boot Hill. Number 2, he mentions Gamma World. So under the section, he calls it 6 Guns and Sorcery. Whether or not you opt to have a time/space warp, throw Boot Hill gunfighters into your AD&D world, or the adventurers from your fantasy milieu enter a Wild West setting, the conversions are the same. Converting and discovering character statistics is handled as follows. And in the book, he actually goes through the Boot Hill game statistics and correlates them directly to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then again, on the next page, Mutants and Magic. Readers of The Dragon might already be familiar with the concept of mixing science fantasy and heroic fantasy from reading my previous article about the adventures of a group of AD&D characters transported via a cursed scroll to another continuum and ending up amidst androids and mutants aboard the Starship Warden of Metamorphosis Alpha. Now, if you don't know, Metamorphosis Alpha was created by James M. Ward, the same incredible writer and game designer who did the Deities and Demigods. Metamorphosis Alpha was the precursor to D&D's, or to TSR's Gamma World. And what Gary is doing is he's not being a gamer at this point. He's being a businessman. He is actually putting marketing material for his other games of TSR in a book about Dungeons and Dragons. This is exactly what Wizards of the Coast is going to do next year in 2026 and 2027. You still here? Oh, I was going to start editing. Maybe I'm not done talking. Well, if you're here, I guess I'll keep talking. So I'm almost out of coffee, which is good for me and for you. Starting to wear down a little bit. Hang on. In fact, you know what? Before I start editing, I would like to show you a commercial. This commercial is not sponsoring my channel. I just thought it would be kind of cool to show a commercial in my channel, on my video. So here you go.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons action figures. A world where adventure never ends. You control warriors with battle-matic arms that fight Grimsword.
There's no escape from my evil dungeon.
Strongheart.
Escape is near.
Mandoom and Metaflame. With battle-matic arms and shield shooters.
Once again, good triumphs over evil. For now.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons action figures with battle-matic features from LJN.
So how does Wizards of the Coast plan to do a multiverse crossover with other aspects of what they own? So as an example, if you look back at TSR in 1978, 1979, they had Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, which came out in 1974. Later, they started to put out other games, Gamma World being one of them, Boot Hill, even before that, which is a Western game. Gamma World being, post-apocalyptic. Later in the campaign settings, they released things like Spelljammer. They released Dark Sun, Mystara, Planescape. They were sort of expanding pretty quickly. They also had a game called Star Frontiers. They also did Marvel superheroes, right? So TSR had other aspects and other games that weren't Dungeons and Dragons. However, I believe there's a strong chance that Wizards of the Coast will tap in to those other assets, right? Not only from a way to expand Dungeons and Dragons, but to also expand the user base, both from a digital perspective and a nostalgic one. Because people like me, people of my age who played D&D for over 40 years, we're rooted in that nostalgia. It is super important to people who play Dungeons and Dragons today, still, from day one. Whatever version of the rules they're playing, whatever edition, whether it's OSR, basic set, AD&D, second edition, third edition, fourth edition, it doesn't matter. We're sort of locked in, right? So one of the things that I want to mention here is the expedition to the Barrier Peaks. And as I mentioned earlier, this was Gary's way. This was written by Gary Gygax back in like 1980, 1980, published in 1980, right? So Expedition to the Barrier Peaks freaked out a lot of D&D players when it came out because it was an official D&D module that basically had like lasers and powered armor and strange monsters that came from a spacecraft. And the reason he did it was for crossover. He wanted people he wanted people to buy Gamma World. He wanted to lock people into TSR. He wanted more sales for more products. It makes sense as a businessman. Gary was a very smart person. The other thing I want to mention is that this book, as a crossover itself, is really important because if you remember the D20 craze back in like 2000, people were putting out just a crap ton of stuff that wasn't fantasy related, right? You had things like Spycraft that came out from Alderac, which was like top secret. Top Secret being another TSR game. There was D20 Modern and D20 Future. What happened to those? Well, I'll tell you what happened to those. They're in the closet. They're waiting to come out again. And Wizards of the Coast is going to tap into those. How? I'll get to that. So the interesting thing about the Expedition to the Barrier Peaks that is in this book, Quest from the Infinite Staircase, is that you have statistics for an android and robots. And those statistics correlate directly to D&D 5e. It's really interesting. And back in 1979, when Gary put out this book and talks about the crossover between Boot Hill and Gamma World, he actually had to do some calculations because the systems were a little different. Gamma World was a little closer to AD&D at the time, but Boot Hill was very different. And so Gary, being the businessman and marketer that he is, decided to do the correlations himself and let people know how to do it if they wanted to do it, right? Now, whether sales of Boot Hill or Gamma World went up because of this, I have no idea. But D&D was making so much money at the time, it didn't really matter. Now, what Wizards of the Coast is most likely going to do is they're going to tap into the nostalgia side. They're also going to stress the digital side so that they can basically take two different markets, younger people who maybe prefer digital products, who don't really buy, go to bookstores and read, hardcover books or softcover books. They read digital books. And from a clutter perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Then you have people like me who prefer physical books to digital. Now, it doesn't mean I don't like digital. I do like digital. But digital clutter is very different than physical clutter. So what Wizards is going to do, most likely, is tap into the other assets that it owns, right? That is still D&D-like. I could easily see them putting out Star Frontiers again as a packaged game. Whether it's boxed, I have no idea, or whether it's in book form, I don't know. But they would be it would be very smart of them to do that. That's one thing. Also, Gamma World has been through 7 editions. Gamma World is very unique in a lot of ways. It's dear to my heart. I love the original first edition Gamma World, and even second and third edition to some extent. They even put out alternate rules for Gamma World. There's a D20 Gamma World. Gamma World is never going to die. Gamma World is the undead of TSR. Gamma World is the undead of tabletop role-playing games. People love Gamma World. If you've never played Gamma World, go play Gamma World. So I wanted to show you this Q2 2024 earnings report by Hasbro. It came out on July 25th of this year. I want to call your attention to this slide here that talks about Hasbro's transformation. There's 3 sections. They have a focus on play, operate with excellence, and strengthen their balance sheet. Now, if you look at what's happening here, you can sort of see how what I speculate in the earlier parts of this video may be truthful. They also want to drive new growth through direct consumer and licensing. Hasbro can increase their profits dramatically by selling games directly to consumers. So several years ago, you could go to Amazon and purchase one of their new hardcover books at a massive discount, right? That is no longer going to be the case. And in fact, if you go to Amazon now and look at some of the new books that are coming out, like the new Player's Handbook that's coming out in September, and possibly the new DMG and Monster Manual that's coming out in early 2025, those aren't on Amazon. And if they are, they're at full retail price. And that's because Hasbro is moving more towards digital sales, which has a higher profit margin and much lower distribution costs. And so that you're going to see a lot more of that next year and in the following years. In the middle section, it says operate with excellence. Focus on the bottom line performance by prioritizing fewer, bigger brands. Again, that augments what they said earlier, drive new growth through direct consumer and licensing, and double down on fewer, bigger brands. So what you're gonna see more of is Dungeons and Dragons, maybe some crossovers with Magic, but more crossovers with what I was talking about earlier. Possible other areas that Wizards of the Coast has not tapped into, namely Gamma World, Star Frontiers, and possibly putting out other campaign settings that are very popular. Perhaps we'll even see a reboot of Eberron. Who knows? Also, they want to target 20% adjusted operating profit margin by 2027. That is pretty aggressive for a company of Hasbro's size. Now, whether or not they can do it, it really depends on their strategy. I think they can do it. It might be difficult. However, we're going to see more cost cutting coming from Hasbro. Possibly layoffs, or possibly reduction in staff salary, and possibly reduction in staff. They're also going to probably save a lot of money by, I know you don't want to hear this, but using artificial intelligence to generate images and possibly even text. Again, I'm not going to go into the details on how they could do this, but it is very likely that in the future, especially with digital products, they're going to start using fewer artists, actual physical artists that create beautiful works of art, and probably have a lot more AI-generated imagery that's probably touched up or polished by a real artist. I could easily see them doing that to save an incredible amount of money. Well, that's all I have for you in this video, but I wanted to thank you for being here. Please, again, like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. I'm going to be doing another giveaway at some point. I just need to figure out what that is and how I'm going to handle it. And also, I'm going to be starting a Patreon based on some of the people who have subscribed to my channel and left comments. Thank you so much for commenting. They requested that I create a Patreon, which I think is a great idea. I had mentioned in an older video that I lost my job last October. I can't believe it's August already, and I'm technically going to be out of work for almost a year. It seems really crazy. So a Patreon will help. It'll help me make these videos, and that's all thanks to you. So please leave a comment below and let me know if you think I'm actually crazy for speculating what I say about where Wizards of the Coast is taking Dungeons and Dragons for the future. One of the things I didn't mention earlier, which I want to mention now, is that they are going all in digital, right? So if you think about it, they sort of have to. Printing costs for books such as Quest from the Infinite Staircase can be very pricey. Also, the cost of transportation. So fuel and transportation is very costly in this day and age in 2024, and it's only going to get higher in 2025 through 2027. So Wizards of the Coast does have to create ways to distribute their products digitally, and that will save them a lot of money, and it'd also technically be an infinite source of income, right? Digital doesn't really go away unless you want it to. So physical books, after a publisher like Wizards sells them, they go on the secondary market. Wizards doesn't make any money on the secondary market. Just look at what happened with Magic the Gathering and all the stuff that's on the list that they can't reprint. reserved list, right? So Magic the Gathering makes a lot of money on the secondary market, which of course Wizards of the Coast cannot tap into. So digital is going to be very, very important in the next few years. So that's where I want to leave it. I do have another video that I'm working on, in fact, several. I am going to speculate on some other things that Wizards of the Coast is going to do. Again, these are all just me looking at the news, looking at their website, looking at their data, looking at their stock, looking at their sales. This is all me trying to figure it out. I could be completely wrong, but maybe I'm not. And either way, it was fun to make these videos. So thanks again. I really appreciate you. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks.